Giuseppe Moretti, the beloved owner of a local pizzeria, is found dead under mysterious circumstances. As the investigation unfolds, secrets emerge that twist the very fabric of the community, secrets of crime, betrayal, and a deadly web of connections that no one ever suspected could exist beneath their feet. In a town where nothing is as it seems, the search for the truth will uncover more than anyone bargained for. It was a quiet Friday evening in the small Belgian town of Bruges, a city known for its cobbled streets, scenic canals, and rich history. At the heart of the town stood a pizzeria that had become a local favorite. The charming restaurant, La Bella Tavola, was owned by Giuseppe Moretti, a man who had moved to Belgium several years ago. Giuseppe, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and piercing brown eyes, had quickly gained a reputation for his delicious pizzas and warm personality. The locals loved him, often stopping by after a long workday to indulge in a slice of their favorite pie. But beneath the surface of the charming pizzeria owner, a darker secret simmered. Giuseppe's story began long before he set foot in Belgium. Born in a small town near Naples, Italy, he had grown up in a family steeped in tradition. His father had owned a successful pizzeria, and Giuseppe had learned the trade from a young age. His talent with dough and sauce had made him an asset to his family's business. But a series of unfortunate events led to a falling out, and Giuseppe found himself leaving Italy in search of a fresh start. Belgium offered him just that, or so he thought. In Bruges, he had managed to buy a small, run-down pizzeria in need of some love and care. With his experience, he transformed the place into something special. The restaurant became a cornerstone of the community, and Giuseppe's reputation grew. He hired a handful of locals, including a young woman named Claire Dubois, who worked as a waitress. Claire was in her early 20s, with long curly hair and bright blue eyes that sparkled with curiosity. She had been working at La Bella Tavola for about a year and had quickly become one of Giuseppe's most trusted employees. Everything seemed perfect on the outside. The pizzeria flourished, and Giuseppe appeared to be living the life he had always dreamed of. But inside the walls of La Bella Tavola, things were not as they seemed. There was a secret, a terrible, dark secret, that Giuseppe had worked tirelessly to bury. It had haunted him for years, lurking beneath his polished facade. And it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. On the evening of January 12, 2023, Claire arrived at work, just like any other day. The air was crisp, and the streets were filled with the sound of laughter and chatter from tourists and locals alike. Claire greeted Giuseppe with her usual smile, not knowing that this night would be different. The pizzeria was busy that evening, with a steady stream of customers coming and going, but despite the hustle and bustle, there was an underlying tension in the air. Giuseppe seemed agitated, his movements quick and deliberate. He kept his eyes on the door, as if waiting for someone. Claire didn't think much of it at first. She had seen him act this way before, when he was expecting a delivery or waiting on an important phone call. As the night wore on, things took a turn for the worse. Around 9:30 p.m., just as Claire was finishing up an order, the door to the pizzeria opened. In walked a man who was unfamiliar to her, though Giuseppe's reaction made it clear that they knew each other. The man was of average height, dressed in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by a hood. He walked straight to the back of the restaurant, where Giuseppe stood, his expression tense. Claire didn't think much of it. It was a slow night, and the last thing she wanted to do was get involved in any drama. But as she busied herself with cleaning the counter, she couldn't help but notice the exchange between the two men. They spoke in hushed voices, their words inaudible over the sound of the busy kitchen. A few minutes later, the man left, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. That's when things took a turn for the worse. The next morning, Claire arrived at work to find the pizzeria closed. The shutters were down, and there was an eerie silence in the air. Confused, she knocked on the door, but received no response. It wasn't like Giuseppe to close without any warning, especially on a Saturday morning. Concerned, Claire reached for her phone and called him, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her worry began to grow. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when the police arrived, that the truth began to unfold. Detectives entered La Bella Tavola, their eyes scanning the room for any signs of foul play. They quickly found what they were looking for. In the back office, Giuseppe lay dead, a single gunshot wound to the chest. The scene was grim, but it wasn't the violence that shocked the officers. It was the discovery that would turn the case from a simple homicide to something much darker. As the investigation unfolded, the truth about Giuseppe Moretti's past began to surface. It wasn't long before Claire learned that the man who had come to the pizzeria the night before was not a stranger. His name was Marco Ricci, a man with a dark history of his own. Marco and Giuseppe had known each other for years, though their relationship was not one of friendship. Marco had been involved in several criminal enterprises, and it seemed that he and Giuseppe shared a connection that was anything but innocent. The details of their connection would soon come to light. It turned out that Giuseppe had been involved in an illicit operation, one that involved smuggling illegal goods across borders. Marco had been his partner in this operation, and the two men had used the pizzeria as a cover for their activities. Giuseppe had grown tired of the dangerous game he was playing and had planned to pull out, but Marco had different plans. The confrontation that took place on the night of January 12th was not about money or betrayal. It was about a secret that Giuseppe could no longer keep. Marco had come to silence him forever. The investigation into Giuseppe's murder revealed the extent of the criminal activities that had been taking place under the guise of the pizzeria. But it wasn't just the smuggling operation that shocked the community. It was the realization that Giuseppe had been hiding a deeper secret, one that involved the young waitress, Claire. As the days passed, Claire's life was turned upside down. She was questioned by the police, and her name began to appear in the media. The innocent young woman who had been working in the pizzeria was now caught up in a deadly web of crime and betrayal. The investigation uncovered a tragic truth. Claire had unknowingly been the daughter of a rival crime family, and her presence in the pizzeria had made her a pawn in a much larger game. But for Claire, the worst was yet to come. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, she realized that she had been living in a nightmare, one that had started long before she stepped foot in La Bella Tavola. Giuseppe Moretti's murder was just the beginning of a chilling story that would forever change the town of Bruges. The truth about what had happened in the quiet pizzeria was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. And, as the investigation continued, it became clear that this was no ordinary crime. It was a tale of betrayal, violence, and secrets that had been buried for far too long. The truth would eventually come out, but at what cost? As the investigation into Giuseppe Moretti's death progressed, the details about his criminal ties became increasingly clear. Detectives, combing through the pizzeria, uncovered numerous documents, hidden compartments, and even photographs that connected him to an underground network of illegal trade. The operation had been much larger than anyone in Bruges could have imagined. The town that prided itself on its peaceful atmosphere had been unknowingly serving as the perfect cover for a dangerous business. What was once a beloved pizzeria was now a crime scene, its walls concealing secrets that had taken years to unravel. The discovery of these hidden elements shook the town to its core. Locals had no idea that the man they'd trusted with their Friday night pizza had been involved in such illicit activities. Giuseppe's presence in the town was synonymous with reliability and charm, and the shocking revelation that he had been a key player in a criminal network left many in disbelief. Yet, as the police dug deeper, they realized that the man they had once regarded as a hard-working entrepreneur had been living a double life, one far removed from the warm, welcoming image he had carefully crafted for the people of Bruges. One of the first things that stood out was the discovery of several large sums of money stashed in an old safe hidden behind the pizzeria's kitchen. It was clear that Giuseppe had been running a money laundering operation, funneling profits from illegal trade through his legitimate business. The police were able to trace some of the funds back to Marco Ricci, the man who had visited the pizzeria the night of the murder. Marco had been more than just an associate. He had been a central figure in the criminal activities, and it was apparent that he and Giuseppe had developed a business partnership that had been thriving for years. In addition to the money, detectives uncovered a network of contacts that Giuseppe had maintained with individuals across Europe. There were letters, encrypted messages, and phone records that tied him to a number of high-ranking figures in organized crime. He had been a key player in smuggling operations, trafficking goods across borders and facilitating deals that ranged from illegal weapons to stolen artifacts. The magnitude of his involvement in this dark world left investigators stunned. But it was not just Giuseppe's criminal network that kept the police digging. There was the more personal matter of his relationship with Claire Dubois. The young waitress had unknowingly found herself entangled in a complex web that involved more than just a job in a pizzeria. Investigators quickly focused on her because of her proximity to Giuseppe and the strange events that surrounded her life in the weeks leading up to his death. As the police delved into Claire's background, they began to uncover some unsettling truths. Claire had grown up in a seemingly ordinary family, raised by her mother, who had worked as a schoolteacher, and her father, a well-respected businessman. To most people, Claire was just a regular young woman, working to pay for her studies while serving pizzas in a local restaurant. However, as the investigation unfolded, it became evident that Claire's family had some ties to criminal organizations, something she had never suspected. A series of confidential reports indicated that Claire's father, Marc Dubois, had once been involved with a rival crime syndicate that had operated in the southern regions of Belgium. Although he had distanced himself from that world many years ago, his connections to organized crime ran deep. Marc had been known for his business dealings with questionable individuals, and even though he had tried to leave that life behind, the damage had already been done. As the authorities began to connect the dots, they realized that Claire's presence at the pizzeria had not been a mere coincidence. Giuseppe had probably seen her as a way to gain access to information from the rival crime syndicate, information that he could use to his advantage in the smuggling business. It became clear that Claire's family had been a part of a larger, dangerous game. She had been unknowingly drawn into this web of deceit, just as Giuseppe had planned. But what shocked everyone was the revelation that Claire had been completely unaware of the danger she was in. As the investigation unfolded, she began to realize that the man who had employed her, the man she had thought of as a mentor, had been using her for his own gain. Claire was heartbroken and betrayed. She had never suspected that Giuseppe, whom she had trusted, had been involved in such dangerous dealings, let alone that he had used her as a pawn. The police continued to dig into the circumstances surrounding the night of Giuseppe's murder. Surveillance footage revealed that on the evening of January 12th, Marco Ricci had arrived at La Bella Tavola in the late evening, his presence carefully timed. After exchanging a few words with Giuseppe, the two men had gone into the back office. The security cameras caught Marco leaving, but Giuseppe never reappeared. The footage was haunting. Giuseppe had been alone with Marco, and the last person to see him alive had been his former partner. It didn't take long for the police to make their next breakthrough. Investigators found a hidden room in the basement of the pizzeria, one that was completely sealed off from the rest of the establishment. The room contained stacks of paperwork, old photographs, and even items that seemed to hint at the violent nature of the operation that had been run under the guise of a simple restaurant. There was evidence of weapons, blueprints for smuggling routes, and countless documents that detailed the logistics of their illegal trades. Most chilling of all was the discovery of several surveillance photos of Claire, taken without her knowledge. It seemed that Giuseppe had been watching her every move, ensuring that she remained oblivious to the danger that surrounded her. The discovery of the hidden room left investigators with more questions than answers. How long had Giuseppe been planning this? How many people had he deceived? And how many lives had been affected by his criminal activities? The more the police uncovered, the darker the reality became. It was becoming clear that Giuseppe's murder was not just about a personal betrayal. It was about eliminating a threat that had become too large to control. As the investigation continued, more evidence began to emerge, slowly revealing the true extent of the pizzeria owner's criminal empire. Giuseppe had been a master manipulator, using his charm and reputation to hide his criminal activities in plain sight. His death had been a desperate attempt to bury the secrets that had haunted him for years. For Claire, the truth was painful to accept. She had been unknowingly caught in a world that had never been hers to begin with. The town of Bruges, which had once seemed so peaceful and safe, had been the backdrop for a dangerous game that had now come to light. Claire's world would never be the same again. The investigation into Giuseppe's death would continue, but for Claire, the realization that the life she had known was built on lies and betrayal was the hardest truth to face. As the investigation continued, the police were increasingly determined to uncover every layer of Giuseppe Moretti's hidden life. The town of Bruges, once unaware of the secrets nestled within its peaceful streets, now found itself at the center of a dark web of crime and betrayal. The authorities quickly shifted their focus to Marco Ricci, Giuseppe's old associate. Their partnership had gone back years, but with the discovery of Marco's involvement in the illegal operations, investigators became certain that he held the key to understanding why Giuseppe had been murdered. His motives remained unclear, but one thing was certain: Giuseppe had paid the price for something far larger than personal animosities. The case became more complex when it was revealed that Marco had been operating under the radar for years, blending into the local community while pulling the strings of a network of international criminals. Through various sources, including phone records and informants, the police found that Marco had been responsible for facilitating deals between Giuseppe and high-level figures in organized crime. Marco's movements had been traced across several European countries, including Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands. He had been involved in trafficking illicit goods, money laundering, and other illegal dealings. But now, it seemed as though he had come to a crossroads. After Giuseppe's death, Marco vanished from sight. He quickly left Bruges, slipping through the cracks of the tight-knit town like a shadow, leaving the authorities with a single burning question: why kill Giuseppe? What had happened between the two men that had escalated into a violent end? Detectives pieced together the timeline of events leading to that fateful night in January. The weeks before Giuseppe's death had been marked by increasing tensions. The Pizzeria, a place once filled with laughter and conversations over pizza and wine, had become an uneasy environment. Claire, who had worked for Giuseppe for months, began noticing small, subtle shifts in the owner's behavior. The jovial man she had grown fond of had started to act erratically, his mood swings more pronounced, his temper unpredictable. She had no way of knowing, of course, that these changes were signs of deeper issues at play. Giuseppe had begun distancing himself from his staff, including Claire. It became clear that his attention was being consumed by the mounting pressure of his criminal activities. As he sank deeper into the world of money laundering and smuggling, his priorities shifted. His business, once a charming Italian pizzeria, was no longer just about food. It had become a front for his criminal dealings. It was becoming harder for him to maintain the carefully constructed image he had built over the years, and perhaps that was what finally led him to cross paths with Marco one last time. Claire was completely unaware of what was happening behind closed doors. She simply thought that Giuseppe was under stress due to the nature of his business, but she never suspected that his life was in danger. She had no reason to believe that the man who had hired her, whom she had worked with for months, was entangled in such dangerous affairs. Yet, as the police dug deeper, they discovered that Claire's growing distance from Giuseppe wasn't simply due to his stress. It was because he had become more paranoid and secretive, afraid of something coming to light. Something, or someone, had forced him to make decisions that he could no longer undo. The police began to examine the possibility that Marco had feared that Giuseppe had outlived his usefulness. It seemed that over time, Giuseppe's ambition had begun to overshadow the loyalty that had once bound the two men together. Marco may have seen him as a liability, a threat to the network they had both helped build. As the days went on, the investigators learned that Giuseppe had been trying to break away from the grip of his criminal associates, planning to turn his back on the life that had once made him wealthy. But those plans, if true, were cut short by Marco's intervention. The murder was no longer just a random act. It had been a calculated move by a man who feared losing control of the network they had both worked to establish. The discovery of Claire's connections to the criminal world added another layer of complexity to the case. As the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that Claire's family history might have influenced her involvement with Giuseppe and, by extension, with Marco's syndicate. Claire's father, Marc Dubois, had once been a low-level player in a rival crime syndicate. Though Marc had long distanced himself from his past, the ties to organized crime had never truly disappeared. It was clear that Claire, unknowingly, had been drawn into the orbit of criminal operations she had never asked to be a part of. One crucial detail uncovered by investigators was the realization that Claire's father had been involved in a long-running feud with Marco Ricci's associates. It was this rivalry that seemed to have sparked a chain of events that led to Giuseppe's death. While Claire had no direct involvement in the world of crime, her family's legacy had become a point of tension. It appeared that Giuseppe's association with her, though seemingly innocent, had placed him at the center of a dangerous conflict. At this point in the investigation, the police focused their efforts on tracking down Marco Ricci. They knew that if they could locate him, they would have the answers they had been searching for. Surveillance footage had captured Marco's face clearly before he vanished, and the authorities knew they were getting closer to unraveling the full extent of his role in the murder. Days turned into weeks, but Marco remained elusive. There were rumors that he had fled the country, possibly hiding in one of the countries where he had ties. Police had already reached out to law enforcement agencies across Europe, seeking assistance in tracking him down. With each passing day, the case seemed to grow colder, and the pressure mounted on the detectives. It was becoming increasingly clear that Marco, the man who had once been Giuseppe's business partner, held the key to understanding the motive behind the murder. Meanwhile, the town of Bruges had been rocked to its very core. A place once known for its tranquility and charm was now forever linked to a brutal crime, and the residents who had known and trusted Giuseppe felt betrayed. The pizzeria, once a bustling hub of activity, sat empty, the sign on the door collecting dust. Claire's life had been turned upside down, and while the investigation was still ongoing, it was clear that the repercussions of Giuseppe's actions would affect everyone in the community. The town would never be the same. The picture-perfect streets of Bruges had revealed a darkness that no one had ever expected. Months passed since Giuseppe Moretti's murder, and the town of Bruges had become a shadow of its former self. The investigation was still in full swing, but the quiet streets now seemed to echo with the whispers of disbelief and horror. The pizzeria, once the beating heart of the neighborhood, remained closed, its windows darkened, and the aroma of fresh pizza long gone. What had once been a place for family dinners and friendly conversations had now been reduced to a crime scene. The sight of the shop's doors locked tight, its once bustling atmosphere replaced with an unsettling silence, left a deep sense of unease in the residents who had once enjoyed its welcoming atmosphere. Despite the pressure mounting on the investigators, Marco Ricci remained elusive. After weeks of relentless efforts to trace him, the authorities began to question if he had indeed left Europe, or if he was hiding in plain sight, knowing all too well the importance of blending into the crowd. His years of experience in the criminal underworld had taught him how to remain invisible, how to cover his tracks, and keep those in pursuit at bay. But the authorities weren't ready to give up. They knew that Marco, despite his cunning, had left behind traces, small, almost imperceptible clues that could finally lead them to him. As time wore on, new information began to surface. The police were able to uncover phone records that revealed a series of communications between Marco and various individuals connected to criminal organizations. The connections were chilling. Marco had been in touch with a variety of unsavory figures, some of whom had long been wanted by law enforcement. These connections reinforced the suspicion that Marco had orchestrated Giuseppe's death as a means of securing his grip on their illicit operations. Investigators had hoped that Marco's fear of being exposed would lead him to make a mistake, and as they dug deeper into his past, it became clear that his criminal life had been far more entangled with Giuseppe's than anyone had initially realized. Through further investigation, it became evident that Giuseppe had been involved in a plan to get out of the criminal world for good. It seemed that he had started distancing himself from Marco, a decision that could have been driven by the mounting pressure of living a double life. Giuseppe's decision to leave was not just about him. It had consequences that rippled across the entire network of organized crime he had been a part of. Marco had been aware of this move, and rather than allowing Giuseppe to leave unscathed, he chose to silence him before it could jeopardize their shared criminal empire. The breakthrough in the case came when the police received an anonymous tip. pointing them toward a location in a neighboring town where Marco had reportedly been seen meeting with a contact. The tip led the authorities to a run-down apartment on the outskirts of Ghent. With bated breath, the investigators moved in, determined that this would be the moment they would finally catch Marco Ricci. The raid was swift. Officers surrounded the building, securing every exit, and made their way inside. They searched the premises, their hearts pounding with anticipation, knowing that this could be the end of the man who had orchestrated Giuseppe's murder. But when they reached the apartment's interior, what they found was nothing short of surprising. There was no sign of Marco. The place had been cleared out, the furniture gone, and the windows tightly shut. It seemed that once again Marco had evaded capture. Yet, as the officers continued to comb through the place, they found something even more disturbing. An array of documents that appeared to be connected to Giuseppe's business dealings, as well as a list of names, including people from the local criminal scene. Among the papers, the investigators found records of transactions involving large sums of money that didn't match any legitimate business activity. The papers also revealed evidence of money laundering schemes that had been running under the guise of the pizzeria. Marco had been using Giuseppe's restaurant as a front for his operations, funneling dirty money through the business in exchange for profit. What seemed like a quaint Italian pizzeria on the surface had, in reality, been the hub of a far-reaching network of crime and corruption. The discovery left the police shaken, but they also realized that they had uncovered an important lead. The documents provided enough evidence to secure a warrant for a more thorough investigation of other properties linked to Marco and his associates. This was the turning point the authorities had been waiting for, and they knew they had to act quickly. The evidence suggested that Marco's criminal reach extended far beyond Bruges, and with the right connections, he had managed to maintain a nearly untraceable existence. As investigators worked to piece together the puzzle of Marco's involvement, the community continued to reel from the shock of Giuseppe's murder. Claire, who had been left in the dark about the full extent of the criminal activity at the pizzeria, was still struggling with the consequences of her association with Giuseppe. She had known him as a kind man who gave her a job when she was struggling to make ends meet. He had always seemed like an ordinary businessman, but now the truth was becoming painfully clear. The world she had unknowingly entered was one of danger, secrecy, and betrayal. Yet, even as the case moved forward, Claire found herself questioning her own role in the entire affair. Had she missed any signs that something was amiss? Could she have done something to prevent what had happened to Giuseppe? She often found herself staring into the distance, grappling with the realization that her life had been irrevocably altered by the man she had once trusted. Her life, once simple and uncomplicated, had become entangled in a web of crime that she couldn't escape, even if she tried. As for the town of Bruges, its peaceful facade had been shattered. The streets were quieter now, as if the very air had been thickened with suspicion and doubt. No one could look at the pizzeria, once a beloved landmark, in the same way again. It was as if the entire town had become an unwilling participant in a crime it had never asked for. Giuseppe's murder had not only robbed the community of a well-known business, but had also exposed the underbelly of a hidden criminal world. The people of Bruges now realized how little they truly knew about the people living next to them, and it would take years before the scars left by the tragedy would fade. The authorities, though frustrated by Marco's evasion, continued to work tirelessly, knowing that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering more about Marco's network. They were closer than ever, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they would catch him. Marco Ricci's name would eventually be brought to justice. Of that, the investigators were certain. But, in the quiet corners of Bruges, the residents would never forget the events that had unfolded within their community, forever changing their perception of the world around them. If you want to unravel the final secrets, subscribe now. Stay tuned for more thrilling documentaries.